Ever since I reviewed my Seiko SLA043 against my Tudor Blackbay 58, many of you guys have been asking me to compare the Wise against the Seiko. This is a $600 Microbrand against a $5,000 Seiko, because so many people say that you get so much value for money from a Microbrand as compared to a major brand. Let's compare this Wise Microbrand against this Seiko major brand. First cab off the rank in this comparison is wearability. And in wearability, the Wise is extremely surprising. It's got a 10 out of 10, whereas the Seiko gets an 8 out of 10. And that all comes down to the way the watch fits on the wrist. Now, to get a 10 out of 10, the watch has to be pretty special. And that's exactly what this is. The lug-to-lug distance, the case height is phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. This is a 41mm diver and it sits on the wrist absolutely beautiful. Now in comparison, the Seiko is a 39.9mm and again, it sits fantastic. The only thing that lets the Seiko down is that case height. It's just that little bit higher, it just sits a little bit more pronounced at the base, so I've knocked it down 2 marks to 8 out of 10 because of that height. And you can see a direct comparison there exactly. The Wise is on the bottom, the Seiko's on the top. That profile of the Wise, for a 41mm coming in that thin, it sits on the wrist really well. Next criteria on the watches is the case finishing. Now the Wise is 904L stainless steel and it's fully polished everywhere, whereas the Seiko is the ever brilliant steel and it's got the phenomenal fine brushing from the Grand Seiko factory. In the execution, I'd have to say that's a 10 out of 10. That's very good. That comes down to a 9 out of 10. Really bright, really well finished, top job for a Microbrand. Next cab off the rank is the sapphire crystals. Both watches featured box dome sapphire crystals. They seem to be doing the exact same job. From the anti-reflective coating treatments to the distortion at the edge, there really is nothing between them. I've ranked them both at 9 out of 10 for the Wise, 9 out of 10 for the Seiko. I've had better sapphire crystals, that's why I knocked them down to 9 instead of a 10. But in saying that, they're both exceptional. Before we continue, let me give you a quick word about our sponsor, Watch Crunch. Watch Crunch has paid me a large amount of undisclosed, unmarked, unsequential dollar bills to sponsor this video. And now, I'm rich beyond my wildest dreams. Well, maybe not rich, but they've sponsored this video, which is pretty cool. So what is Watch Crunch? Well, basically it's a platform for watch nerds who wear more than one watch per day, just like me. And you know what? It's actually free. It costs nothing, zero, zilch. I joined up myself a while back and I tell you what, it's just an honest bunch of watch nerds with none of the BS. There's no hype, there's no bullying, just a friendly community of real watch lovers like you and me. So if you love watches, then this is the perfect outlet for questions, discussions, posts, wrist shot of the day. It's pretty cool. I encourage you guys, head over there and if you get a chance, even follow me on Watch Crunch. Let's get back to the video. Now when it comes to the Lume, that's a very interesting topic here because I know the Seiko is fantastic. In the previous review I gave it a 9.5 out of 10. It's brilliant. And that Wise comes in at exactly the same, 9.5 out of 10. It not only keeps up with the Seiko, it lasts just as long, it's bright, it's legible, really impressed. And that's where I think a Microbrand, they're using Superluminova, they're competing with the big boys and they're doing it very well. So 9.5 out of 10, 9.5 out of 10, well done. Now the movements of both watches are very interesting because the Seiko comes with an in-house, it's got 50 hours power reserve, it's unregulated, but it has 0 positional variance. So an extremely accurate movement from the Grand Seiko factory and I love that. That I gave an 8 out of 10 only because it's unregulated. Whereas the Wise comes with a Miyota 9015. It's straight off the shelf, it's got 42 hours power reserve, and for that reason I've knocked it down to 6 out of 10. Not because it's not a good movement, it is, but in comparison to the Seiko, that's an 8, that's a 6. They've got a custom rotor on it, nothing spectacular, but it can be purchased off the shelf, any up and coming Microbrand, so for that reason I've marked it down to a 6. Value for money? Now this is where it gets interesting. You're paying $600 for this watch, you're paying $5,000 for this watch. That's an easy 10 out of 10 in comparison. I rate this as a 6 out of 10, I rate this at a 10 out of 10. This is where we talk about Microbrands offering so much more for the dollar spent. And here is a comparison. In my eyes, it's a no-brainer. But yeah, as far as what you're getting as a final product, 10 out of 10, 6 out of 10 for the money spent. The next factor I wanted to speak about was legibility. And that's a very interesting criteria with both these watches, because the Seiko to me is a 9 out of 10. It's very clean, very easy to read in any lighting situations. I've not had an issue at all. A really, really good experience. And it's only 9 out of 10 because I've got more legible watches. That's it. Whereas the Wise, I've had to downgrade this to an 8 out of 10. Two reasons. Number one, you look at the pattern on the dial, that does come into play in certain lighting situations, but also the hand shape. The hand shape is not as quick to read at a glance as is the Seiko. So that's one of the factors why I've downgraded this to an 8 out of 10 and the Seiko's a 9 out of 10. Next cab off the rank is the bezels. And the bezels on these are pretty much fantastic in their own right, but I've marked them down 1 point each for certain criteria. That's a 9 out of 10, that's a 9 out of 10. And the action on the actual Seiko is spectacular. It is so nice to turn. It's beautiful, it's refined. It is a Seiko in its movement. You can feel the 120 click, but it's not mushy. It's actually really dampened nicely. And the only reason, there's just that little bit of backplay in areas and lines up perfectly, but I've marked it down to a 9 out of 10 because of that backplay. The Wise, on the other hand, there's zero backplay. It lines up perfectly. It's loud, but to me it's too stiff. And I mentioned this in the review, their previous generations, the Wise Hitman, or even the 300 meter diver that they supplied for me to review a couple of years ago, that had the perfect bezel. For me, the action on those were perfect. I think they've made these a little bit stiffer, only for the fact of not, you can't knock them, you can't sort of accidentally move them. I get it, but it is a little bit less of a refined movement as compared to the Seiko. So 9 out of 10 because of that stiffness, 9 out of 10 because of that backplay. Now the wow factor on both watches is quite interesting, because in the previous review I gave this Seiko a 9 out of 10. It seems to pick up the light, the bling factor of those indices, those high polished hands. It just really works, and people look at this watch on my wrist and they just say, wow. It seems to catch people's attention that are not watch nerds. So the wow factor on this is a definite 9 out of 10. The Microbrand, the Wise, on the other hand, is exact same marks, 9 out of 10. That high polished 904L stainless steel case, the way that this catches the light with the high polished indices, markers, it just works. So people that are not in the know, they look at this just as much as they look at this. So, I had to mark them exactly the same, 9 out of 10, 9 out of 10. Now the last and final factor of this comparison is strap changes. And I've given the Seiko a 10 out of 10 because of those drilled lugs. It's extremely easy to change straps. I just use the existing fat spring bars. It seems to offer a lot of security and reassurance with the fat spring bars, as well as the fact that it's got drilled lugs. No marks on the watch, very easy to change. The Wise, on the other hand, I've knocked it down 2 marks to 8 out of 10. And 2 reasons. Number one, it does not have drilled lugs, and number 2, it seems to already have a few marks here and there from strap changes, whereas the Seiko does not. And I think, look, I might be wrong here, guys. You guys are probably more in the know, you can correct me, but reading some articles on the Ever Brilliant steel, apparently it's, I think, 1.6 times stronger than your normal stainless. So I might be wrong, but maybe you guys can correct me in the comment section. But look, add all those numbers together, we get 87.5, we get 87.5. So that just demonstrates that a micro brand coming in at literally a tenth of the price of a major brand can basically compete. Sure, you got a much better movement, history, pedigree, but you're not getting the value for money. You really are not. That's where micro brands come in. So I'm glad you guys asked me to compare these two. It was an interesting experience for me as well, how these things compare. One thing I was impressed about, the way this thing wears, the height, the footprint. For a 41, that's fantastic. Obviously the finishing, the quality control of this is exceptional. It is a Grand Seiko, out of the Grand Seiko factory. So wanted to see what it was like, guys. Let me know in the comments, guys, what you think. I hope you enjoyed that comparison. I tried to be as neutral as possible, comparing a micro brand to a major brand. Thank you for watching once again. Hit me up in the comments with your suggestions, and we'll see you all in the next video.